So Chapter 9 of Two Blue Vortex has been out for a little while now, and the community is still reeling. And while there are a lot of parts of Chapter 9 that deserve a full breakdown video, the point that I'm most excited to break down is a point in the chapter that I feel as though a lot of people missed. When Boruto was shown returning to what we can assume is his and Kashin Koji's hideout that they've been using for the last 3 years, that their hideout looks decidedly snake-like. Snake-like in the fact that the walls contained slithering snakes with lights in their mouths to light the way through this cave, and those very same walls and the floors appeared to be decorated with scale-like tiles. And while snake lights and floor and wall snake scale tiles do definitely look cool, it's a bit far to go for an architectural choice, especially when you consider the fact that we're talking about Boruto and Kashin Koji's hideout here, which makes no sense. See, because not only is it odd that Kashin Koji and Boruto's hideout appears to be some kind of cave system decorated with snake memorabilia, but it's even odder when you consider the fact that Kashin Koji is a perfect toad sage and employs the usage of toads who may or may not be from Mount Mubuko, and yet their hideout is anything but toad-like. In fact, it's the polar opposite of the toads. It's the snakes. And this is why it would make a substantial amount more sense if they were in some kind of toad cave. And why wouldn't that happen? I mean, one of the most popular theories when Kashin Koji was revealed to be Boruto's time-skip keeper is that Boruto, over the course of the last 2 or possibly 3 years, has been training with Kashin Koji to become a perfect toad sage like Kashin Koji and his father. And yet here we are in Chapter 9 tying connections between the two of them and snakes, heading in the opposite direction of what many people anticipated. So what could this mean? What possible scenario could have Kashin Koji and Boruto using a snake cave as a hideout? Before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, MeUndies. Listen, underwear drawers are the closest example of real-life entropy that a lot of us get to experience. There's no rhyme or reason to the position of anything. It's always a mess. It's comprised of 2 pairs of underwear you bought for yourself 3 years ago, 4 pairs you got for Christmas 6 years ago, and 3 of them got holes in them. Most of us are probably just reaching into our underwear drawers, grabbing whatever we get our hands on, and putting that on for the day. As long as it's clean, I guess you're good to go. And while admittedly, I used to be that way, I'm now a changed man. See, now that I've felt the buttery comfort of MeUndies, I only have one brand of underwear in my underwear drawer. I'm sure every man watching this video can relate to what a hot day does to your inner thighs and the family jewels. But that problem has been completely eliminated by MeUndies, as the contoured pouch and ball caddy keeps those parties separate. No more worrying about sticking, slipping, or sweating. Give your boys the hug they deserve and keep them away from those thighs. But it's not just the ball caddy that keeps these bad boys so comfortable. See, MeUndies come in every size from extra small to 4XL, guaranteeing a flattering and comfortable cut for everybody. On top of this, whether you go for all blacks like me or expressive prints, whatever your style, MeUndies has got you covered. But MeUndies has got you covered in more things than just underwear, as they also have a lounge collection featuring joggers, hoodies, and so much more. But really, it's the comfort of their underwear that keeps me coming back. Their signature fabric is breathable, stretchy, and oh so comfortable. On top of this, MeUndies holds themselves to the guarantee that all of their materials are responsibly sourced, and is also so sure that you'll love your first pair of MeUndies that if you don't love it, well, they'll cover it. So what are you guys waiting for? Good things come in big packages at MeUndies. So get 20% off your first order plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/NCHammer. You and me could be wearing the same underwear. Well, as I see it, there's 3 possible answers, all of which are equally possible, but are definitely not equally interesting. And today we're gonna break down those 3 possibilities to get to the truth of the matter behind this weird snake-themed hideout. Because today we're talking Boruto is being trained by Orochimaru. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of my brain creating crackpot theories of your favorite anime and manga, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you just love the idea of listening to me talk about anime and manga, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Itaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see me talk about anime and manga live, come on and see me in Comic Palooza this Memorial Day weekend, May 24th to the 26th down in Houston, Texas. I'm going to be doing 6 whole panels and hanging out with you guys chat and anime. See, the unfortunate thing about reading fantastical stories filled with mystery and intrigue, with a brain that's always looking for the most logical answer to any question ever posed, is that unfortunately sometimes my brain decides to answer these lingering questions in the most boring way possible. And then, because that answer holds water and seems somewhat legitimate, I cannot get it out of my head. So I walk through my day with a pessimistic lining on my cheerful hopes that maybe, just maybe, the best possible answer to this question will come true. And today, that scenario is especially true. Because while there are some amazing possible answers to the question of why are Kashin, Koji, and Boruto seemingly in a snake cave that can lead us all the way to incredibly complicated and beautiful theories like Boruto is training with Edo Tensei shinobis in order to acquire the techniques of old, and over the course of the last 3 years he's been training with some of the greatest ninjas of all time in order to bring their techniques to the forefront and become the most powerful ninja of all time, there is also the possibility, at least in my mind, the answer to this question is Orochimaru built a series of maze-like hideouts all across the world that were specifically built in order to avoid censor-type ninjas. And whenever Orochimaru was found by said censor-type ninjas, they had to abandon said laboratory. And thus, skewed across the entirety of the ninja world, there is a myriad of Orochimaru abandoned laboratories, all of which that were built with the exact specs that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto's hideout seems to have. Only other time we've ever seen snake lights is in Orochimaru's hideouts. And while the answer of Boruto and Kashin Koji are using an abandoned Orochimaru lab as a hideout is incredibly boring, it's also highly likely. Think about it. Jiraiya, a fair amount of Konoha's forces, and the Akatsuki all at one point were looking for Orochimaru. I mean, Orochimaru is the only person, outside of Kabuto I guess, but you could say that Kabuto was hated because of his connection to Orochimaru by both Konoha and the Akatsuki simultaneously. And thus Orochimaru, ever since they were expelled from Konoha for their human experiments, has been on a perpetual state of on the move. And thus, over the course of Naruto, we see Orochimaru's labs found 2 to 3 times, which every single time forces Orochimaru to flee the lab to another lab. And the only time that Orochimaru's lab is ever seemingly destroyed in the process of being found is when Deidara and Sasori stumbled upon one of Orochimaru's labs, and Deidara carpet bombed it in order to make sure that it collapsed on top of Orochimaru, killing them once and forever. Didn't work. Orochimaru was seemingly unkillable. And these are only the times that we ever see Orochimaru's lab be found, because like I've already stated, Jiraiya, a fair amount of Konoha's forces, and the Akatsuki were all constantly looking for Orochimaru. There's a possibility that Orochimaru was found 5, 8, 12 times, and every single time Orochimaru had to flee that lab and go to another one. And thus Orochimaru has numerous abandoned laboratories all across the ninja world. And I say abandoned because presumably even now that Orochimaru is an ally of Konoha, they no longer use these laboratories because they now have a state-sponsored, clean, and incredibly profitable laboratory within the confines of Konoha. On top of this, Orochimaru isn't supposed to leave the Konoha state-sponsored laboratory they were given. Though, if Orochimaru wanted to, they absolutely could. They could sneak past Yamato with next to no effort. But all that is to say that now that Orochimaru has a laboratory that they aren't constantly being driven out of, every other laboratory that Orochimaru ever made is now sitting abandoned and mostly intact. And thus the possibility that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto, while on the run from Code and the rest of the world, a story eerily similar to Orochimaru and how they were on the run from the Akatsuki and the ninja world simultaneously, stumbled upon one of Orochimaru's labs and are now using it as a hideout, isn't an unlikely scenario. Orochimaru, as they mostly had to flee their labs without collecting all the things that they had in said lab, probably left the labs incredibly well stocked, well maintained, well lit apparently, and also well out of the way of anybody looking for other people. So this is a highly likely scenario, albeit a very boring one. But unfortunately for both you and I, there are 2 much more interesting possibilities, like the second possibility, which is that this snake cave isn't tied to Orochimaru at all. Because while Orochimaru definitely holds the record for most snake caves ever built, it's a highly competitive title. They were, by far and away, not the first person to build a snake cave. Orochimaru is kind of like the Bryce Halls of the world. Sure, none of their content is their idea, but they made so much of it. So if Orochimaru is not the OG to the snake cave game, who is? Well, the Great White Snake Sage and the rest of the giant snakes who have inhabited the original snake cave, Ryuchi Cave, for thousands of years. But you see, Ryuchi Cave is like Mount Mubuko for goths and people with death wishes, which I guess is redundant, as it's the home of the Great White Snake Sage, the giant white snake that bites those who want to become snake sages and injects their senjutsu chakra into those trying to achieve the godly power of a perfect snake sage mode. And if after having this chakra injected into their neck, the person is able to take that chakra and undergo the incredibly difficult transformation into a snake sage, well then, they got it. But only one person, so far as we know, has ever been able to survive that and succeed. And that one person was Kabuto, as even Orochimaru's body was too frail to undergo the transformation into a snake sage, which is why they made Mitsuki's body stronger than their own. But this attempt to become a snake sage should have been the last thing that Orochimaru ever did, as those who receive the bite from the Great White Snake Sage and aren't able to transform into a snake sage themselves are eaten by the Great White Snake Sage. So as to how Orochimaru survived this transaction that failed, we don't actually know. So if we assume that the hideout that Kashin Koji and Boruto using is, in fact, Ryuchi Cave, we're left with the lingering question of why? Why have the snakes aligned themselves with Boruto and Kashin Koji? Are they immune to omnipotence, or do they just not care? Well, the answer to these questions actually lies in a growing sentiment in the Boruto fandom, which is that anime canon episodes, while obviously not as important as the manga, have slowly but surely been giving us hints about the future of Boruto's timeline, as many people are currently, after the revelations of Himawari being the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, pointing at the Family Day episode in the anime, where Naruto ran around with Himawari trying to get her a Kurama doll. And they take this episode as foreshadowing that eventually Himawari would be given a gift from her father in the form of Kurama, and in a chibi version at that. While the Family Day episode is based off a light novel and is therefore much more canon than any of the other anime canon episodes, there are multiple episodes at the beginning of the Mitsuki retrieval arc where Boruto, along with a fair amount of the new Konoha 12, go to Ryuchi Cave in order to ask the Great White Snake Sage about the snakes that Mitsuki left behind. And a lot happens during this arc, but the most important thing that we're going to talk about today is the fact that people like Sarada and Boruto make lasting connections with snakes from Ryuchi Cave, as Sarada in this arc meets Aoba, Sasuke's second snake. He killed Manda in the battle against Deidara. And Boruto meets Garaga, a massive, easily irritated red snake with one eye. And because anime canon is essentially just filler and therefore should have no real repercussions to the manga-based story, Kagura and Inoki, look away now, Boruto doesn't actually form a summoning contract with Garaga, and therefore he never really solidifies his connection with the snakes. However, this was the first real glimpse we ever got at Boruto having a possible connection to Ryuchi Cave. And this connection makes a lot of sense, because while Sasuke never technically becomes a snake sage, he, through Orochimaru, had a connection to the snakes and would use them as summoning animals. And if you want to get super granular with it, you could say that Sasuke, by tapping into the power of his curse mark and getting Senjutsu chakra from Orochimaru, who was a failed snake sage of sorts, that Sasuke was kind of the snake sage. And thus the idea that Boruto, who was trained by Sasuke for a full year while the two of them were on the run, would at least at some point be brought by Ryuchi Cave by Sasuke to either protect him from outside threats or to find him a snake summon wouldn't be the craziest thing of all time. But Nick, if Boruto and Kashin Koji are hiding out in Ryuchi Cave, does that mean that Boruto's gonna become a snake sage? Yeah, I get it. We all want to slap as many abilities onto Boruto as possible to make him some self-insert OC in the story that just one-shots his way through the rest of the next 80 chapters. Logistically and narratively, making Boruto into a snake sage just doesn't make any sense. Because, well, yes, I will admit I do find it a bit odd that Boruto has spent 2 years with a perfect sage and hasn't learned any form of sage mode. I believe that Kashin Koji, much like Mitsuki, was born as a perfect sage. Well, maybe not born a perfect sage, but was born with a certain genetic and shinobi wear makeup that allowed them to become perfect sages down the line without ever going to Ryuchi Cave or Mount Mubuko. And this is based off how we see Mitsuki come into being a perfect snake sage, which is essentially just Orochimaru shaking Mitsuki awake and being like, oh no, this scroll got stolen. You need to come get it. And the only way you can get it is being so fast. Until Mitsuki was eventually so sick of getting his memories rewritten that he decided to actually activate Snake Sage mode. And if we're assuming that Amado and Orochimaru are comparably good scientists, then it would make sense to assume that Amado turning into a perfect Toad Sage happened in a somewhat similar capacity. And therefore, Kashin Koji probably has no connection to the Toads of Mount Mubuko, which would explain why the Toads of Mount Mubuko never popped over to Naruto and were like, hey, a guy who looks, sounds, and feels a lot like Jiraiya's training to be a Toad Sage again, and thus Kashinkoji has no real knowledge on how to teach Boruto to be like him. On top of this, think about the optics. Ironically, after Chapter 9, if anybody's gonna become a perfect Toad Sage or a sage of any kind in the Uzumaki family, it's gonna be Himawari, whose abilities are running significantly more parallel to her father's than Boruto's, who is meant to closely resemble either Sasuke or Itachi. Boruto becoming a Toad Sage would make him too similar to his father, and Kishimoto has shown us very clearly that he doesn't want Boruto to resemble his father at all, outside of a Rasengan, but even Boruto's Rasengan now no longer looks like Naruto's. In fact, Boruto's Rasengan never really looked like Naruto's. It was throwable from the start, it disappeared, it was tiny, and thus Boruto turning into a perfect Toad Sage is a bad narrative move, but so is him turning into a Snake Sage. Here's the thing, there are so many abilities that you can use in the Naruto universe to get strong. In Snake Sage mode, especially perfect Snake Sage mode, is one of the coolest, but we already have a perfect Snake Sage, and they are quickly becoming one of the most important characters in all of Two Blue Vortex, so having two is kind of redundant. That'd be like if Shikamaru became a Toad Sage after Naruto. It'd be kind of cool and it would make sense for Shikamaru's power system, but I'd rather see Shikamaru be strong through other means. And thus, if Kashinkoji and Boruto are in Ryuchi Cave, I'm assuming it's in a capacity similar to what Boruto did in episode 70, where they aren't there to become Snake Sages, but rather are there to seek protection and possibly information. Why Ryuchi Cave? How did they get there? And why are the snakes letting them chill? Well, if we take the anime canon as canon, then Boruto not only knows about Ryuchi Cave, but also how to get there. The sage areas are notoriously hard to get to and very well protected. It would be a fantastic idea for Boruto to hide in one of them, assuming the sage animals there weren't trying to kill him, which is why many people believe that Boruto went to Mount Mubuko during the time skip. However, there is the definitive possibility that omnipotence works on the toads of Mount Mubuko and the snakes of Ryuchi Cave, and therefore there's a chance that if Boruto went to Mount Mubuko with Kashinkoji, that he would be just as prosecuted there as he is in Konoha. As I don't know if you guys know this, but the toads of Mount Mubuko kind of big fans of Naruto, and thus Boruto had to go somewhere filled with people or snakes that wouldn't care if he killed Naruto or not. And that place is none other than Ryuchi Cave. See, the snakes appear to hold no allegiances to any of the ninja villages, as they aligned themselves with Orochimaru when they planned to destroy Konoha, and gave power to Kabuto when he planned to destroy the entire ninja world. And thus, if the person who murdered Naruto showed up to the doorstep, they wouldn't really have any reason to turn them away. On top of this, there's a possibility that Boruto was delivered to Ryuchi Cave by Sasuke, which would be even more of a reason for the snakes to trust him, as the snakes really only have relationships with 3 people on Earth, and those are Sasuke, his daughter, and Orochimaru. And the idea that Sasuke was the person to do the introductions for Boruto to meeting the snakes in the manga canon would make a lot of sense, as not only would they be protected by the snakes, but they would also be way off the radar. Even more so than that, Boruto would have the ability to train with people, or I guess I should say snakes, that weren't Sasuke, so that when Sasuke ran out of things to teach Boruto, something that he said he was doing 1 year into training Boruto, Boruto could learn from other things. And thus it's highly likely that Kashinkoji and Boruto are in Ryuchi Cave, but it's also equally likely that they're in one of Orochimaru's caves. But the real question becomes, when pondering as to whether or not Kashinkoji and Boruto's hideout could be in one of Orochimaru's caves, is it an abandoned cave or one that they're sharing with Orochimaru? Because the third and final possibility for where Boruto and Kashinkoji's hideout could be is that they are in an occupied Orochimaru laboratory. So we've heard a grand total of nothing at all from the likes of Orochimaru and Two Blue Vortex up to this point. And while this makes sense because they're not a main character, the absence of Orochimaru and Kakashi and Sakura has really not been sitting right with me. And while I believe that Sakura and Kakashi probably have more reason to be in the story than Orochimaru, if Amado, because of the fact that he's one of the greatest scientific minds in all of Boruto, can use scientific evidence to deduce the fact that his memories have been altered in some capacity, but he doesn't know how, it's safe to assume that Orochimaru, who should be comparably smart to Amado, would also be able to do the same thing. And thus, Orochimaru, much like Amado, should at least have misgivings about their own memories. And since we're already seeing that other intelligent characters like Shikamaru are breaking out of omnipotence through their intelligence, Orochimaru, whose intellect easily rivals that of Shikamaru and Amado's, should be able to do the exact same. On top of this, it's worth noting that Orochimaru's current body is that of a white Zetsu. And while that does not make Orochimaru an Otsutsuki, it should mean that their body is about as close to an Otsutsuki as you can get without being one. And thus, since Boruto is being written written to be a Lovecraftian combo of Itachi, Sasuke, and Naruto. What if, on top of Jiraiya's clone being one of Boruto's teachers, he was also being taught by Orochimaru? And thus Boruto would be experiencing the time skips of both Naruto and Sasuke simultaneously during his time skip. But Nick, how would Orochimaru, who's under constant surveillance from Konoha Jonin, possibly get a chance to either sneak out of their laboratory or sneak Kashin, Koji, and Boruto in? Well, Boruto can erase his chakra signature and use Flying Raijin, Orochimaru can turn themselves into a garden snake, and Kashin Koji has already broken into the most secure places in all of Konoha. And thus this cave we see that's Kashin Koji and Boruto's hideout could either be the one that's appointed to Orochimaru by Konoha, or a separate cave that Orochimaru sneaks off to. And once again, this is a possibility that's somewhat foreshadowed by the anime canon, as there's an episode where Boruto and his friends break into Orochimaru's labs to get them to sign their Orochimaru Naruto card. On top of this, since the guards from Konoha aren't allowed in the laboratory, this would be the perfect hiding spot, as nobody from Konoha would check in Konoha for Boruto, and they're not allowed in the laboratory that Boruto would be in. This could also help explain why Boruto would learn Flying Raijin, so that he wouldn't constantly have to keep sneaking into Orochimaru's laboratory. He could just jump into the middle of it. And on top of this, if Boruto is training under both Orochimaru and Kashin Koji, there's two separate ways within that scenario we could use to explain Boruto's new myriad of powers. Either we could say over the last 20-ish years, on top of cracking cloning technology somewhat perfectly, Orochimaru's also cracked a plethora of other jutsu, which we all know they're trying to do, which would make perfect sense because now, for the first time in Orochimaru's entire life, they are allowed to do their jutsu science. With A, no worry of death, they're immortal, they have a white setsu body, and B, with the backing and funding of Konoha. So to assume that they've made more progress in these past 20 years than they have any other part of their life is not crazy. In fact, it might as well be considered fact. You can do way better science when you're not on the perpetual run from laboratory to laboratory, and thus maybe Orochimaru cracked the code on Flying Raijin and how to tap into the Earth's energy to create things like Rasengan Uzuhiko, and thus Orochimaru was able to teach these techniques to Boruto as the next generation of Sasukes they get to teach. However, the other possible answer, which is albeit much more salacious, is that Orochimaru, possibly in order to confirm whether or not Naruto was dead at all, or to get to the truth of the matter to figure out who killed Naruto, tried to use Edo Tensei on Naruto. However, when Orochimaru tried to use Edo Tensei on Naruto, it didn't work. And thus when Naruto wasn't able to be reincarnated, the natural conclusion to come to was that Naruto wasn't dead, and thus the rhetoric of Boruto killing Naruto was false. So if that rhetoric is false, what else could be? And thus with this concrete evidence of Boruto's innocence and possibly Sasuke's testimony, Orochimaru decided to take Boruto under their wing, at which point Boruto began to train either with Orochimaru or with the ninjas they brought back.
But Nick, for Orochimaru to use Edo Tensei, he would have to kill people to use them as conduits to attach the spirits to.
Listen, if you don't think that Orochimaru has a stash of white zetsus that either they kept or created using their cloning technology, one, for scenarios like this where Orochimaru possibly wants to use Edo Tensei in a morally acceptable way, and two, if Orochimaru ever needs to switch bodies again. I mean, Orochimaru literally kept a pit of children that he forced to fight in a battle royale to find one person he could switch into. And if you go with this line of logic, the real possible reason that Boruto learned Flying Raijin was because he learned it from his grandfather, Minato. And thus the reason that Boruto has gotten so unbelievably strong over the time skip is because of his genius level ability to absorb knowledge from people he's training under. Something that Sasuke commented on, saying that in the 1 year that they trained together, that Sasuke almost had nothing more to teach him. And thus Boruto, over the course of the time skip, has been training with and absorbing abilities from some of the greatest ninja that history has ever seen through the medium of Edo Tensei, facilitated by Orochimaru. And this is why Boruto says when he's using Flying Raijin for the first time in Two Blue Vortex that he's not as good as his grandpa. Because while it's a possibility that Boruto had heard the stories of the Yellow Flash of Konoha, it seemed as though he was talking from first-hand experience. But what do you guys think? Do you believe that Kashin Koji and Boruto stumbled upon an abandoned laboratory? Do you believe they're working with Orochimaru? Or do you think they somehow ended up in Ryuchi Cave? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Real answer is going to turn out to be like, yeah, no, Kashin Koji just doesn't like toads. He actually aligns more ideologically with the snakes, so it looks weird to you, but he loves it.